What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. My name is Eric Manjarrez, Executive Pastor at the Reborn Church. If you're new, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. In today's Theology Thursday, I wanted to address the issue of adultery. I wanted to provide a biblical definition for marriage, and also provide guardrails and encouragement and tips for you so you won't let this creep into your marriage. This video is inspired because of recent news in the Christian world. Megachurch Hillsong Pastor Lentz from New York City was recently fired by Hillsong because he stepped out of his marriage, was unfaithful to his wife, and he committed the sin of adultery. And this is news he posted on his Instagram. Hillsong rightfully fired him. Now, I have some differences as far as theology goes with Hillsong. I think some of their theology gets funky, but nevertheless, these people are, they're Christians. We may disagree on certain methodologies and certain doctrine, but if we can come and agree on the gospel, I think that that's important. But nevertheless, I remember some of our youth at my church went to a conference, a young adult or a teenage conference, young adult high school type of conference where Lentz preached at, and I was encouraged by our youth leaders where they had said that he preached the gospel there. That was really encouraging to hear. So that's kind of my connection as far as that goes. I don't know him personally. My wife and I went to New York City, his church in New York City. He actually didn't preach that day. They actually just played a YouTube video of Craig Groeschel, and I have some thoughts on that type of teaching on a Sunday, but nevertheless, this topic we're talking about is adultery. So he had admitted that he stepped out of his marriage. One, I respect Hillsong for firing him. It was the right thing to do. And Lentz admitted on his Instagram post that they rightfully should have done that. And so they fired him. I have a lot of respect for the way that he went about it as far as publicly goes. He publicly made this announcement that he was unfaithful in his marriage. I appreciated that and I respected that. For him to take full responsibility for this. He made sure that he took full responsibility as a man who was unfaithful to a spouse. He took on the responsibility. It also seemed to imply that he's taking the steps necessary to bring a reconciliation to his family, taking the steps necessary for himself to get right in this situation. So I appreciated that. I had a lot of respect in that regard. However, I noticed that there were a lot of Christian responses to his Instagram post. A lot of things that were encouraging, a lot of big name pastors, they said, love you, praying for you. But then there was also some unwise decisions made by various Christians who maybe were connected with him, maybe even not connected with him, kind of like me, just commenting and saying things like, I love you, you've impacted my life so much, this is a minor setback for a major comeback. I saw a lot of posts like that, saying that, I'll see you back in the pulpit soon. When I was assessing this, I saw that in professing Christians that they didn't take marriage in this moment, they didn't take marriage seriously. They didn't take the sin of adultery that seriously. And maybe it was just in this moment that they were just trying to be encouraging, but also it's important for us to realize that it's probably wise, if we don't even have a connection with him, to just remain quiet and just pray for the situation. I noticed that Lentz actually took down all of his comments. What it was doing is it was elevating Lentz in the situation where he should be lamenting, he should be putting on sackcloth and ashes and repenting, but it elevated him and it lifted him up, and it neglected the severity of the sin, but also neglected how his wife felt. And it really just emphasized him to the status that he's already been at, to this pedestal that he's been at. And I just saw that as really unwise. So I wanted to talk today about adultery. God commands his people that we shall not commit adultery. And that's in Exodus 20. That's the 7th commandment that God provides to his people. Now, what is the motivation for why we shouldn't commit adultery? What's the motivation why we shouldn't step out of our marriage and remain faithful? Well, as God's people, we are meant to look to Christ. Christ is faithful to his bride. He never steps outside and never cheats on his bride. So husbands are meant to model Christ in their marriage, and see their spouse as someone that they ought to lay down their life for and commit to and love their wife. That's what husbands are called to do. We're not called to step outside of our marriage. Christ doesn't step outside of relationship with us. I also want to say that marriage is a covenant. It's not a civil contract between two parties. It's not like a contract where you have two businesses, they join together with one firm and they become two, even though and they bring both things to the table and they're just bound by this legal contract. That's not what marriage is. Marriage is a covenant between man and a woman before God. God enters into this covenant with people. He invented marriage, so he defines what marriage is. And when he enters into this marriage, it becomes a covenant between a man and a woman, and also God is present in this. So when we step outside of that, we are in sin. We are sinning against God. We're also affecting not just our spouse, and that's really important, but we're also affecting our family, and also our external family, and everyone that we have an influence in, and everyone that we've impacted. Our integrity begins to decrease and it drops. It takes a long time to build integrity. And in just a moment, your integrity can be vanished, and it could just be dropped, where people lose their respect for you. And it's healthy to experience shame. When we've sinned, it's healthy to experience shame. When we experience shame as a Christian, it has us running to God because we are in desperate need for his grace. So marriage is a covenant. We're not to step outside of the covenant because God has made it that way. God has made it to be lifelong between one man and one woman, and God is present in that. And also, marriage is a symbol of the gospel. Look with me here in Ephesians chapter 5, starting verse 25. It says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church." So there's this long explanation of what a husband's duty is. Husband, the way that you love your wife is you look the way that you love yourselves, and you're supposed to do that for your spouse. Love your spouse as you love your own body, and even more than your own body, because Christ sacrificed himself for his bride. And so men, husbands, you are called at times to lay down your life for your spouse. That's the call for a husband. The call is to lead in a self-sacrificial way. We lead, absolutely. Husbands are called to lead their wives spiritually. And here, that's what the role is, that Christ, he leads the church, and husbands are called to lead their wives, wash them with the water, wash them with the word. As Ephesians chapter 5 here states, that we're supposed to do these things in our marriage. The way that we're called to love our spouse is self-sacrificially. We love our spouse. We see our spouse and we think, that's me. I need to take care of her. And Christ is our primary model for that. So some tips to protect yourself. Some people hate on the Billy Graham rule. I think that there's a lot of integrity and a lot of respect for women in that, and also for your marriage. Billy Graham rule basically is that Billy Graham wouldn't be in a room alone with another woman. Even in public, he made that known. He didn't want to anything to come into and mess up his integrity that he worked so hard to build, and also wanted to protect the honor of his wife. And even more than that, protect the honor of Christ. So even some tips is to have healthy relationships with people of the opposite sex, but not in a way that your spouse feels uncomfortable with. A good verse to be able to memorize is James chapter 4:7, and it says, "Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." In the moments of temptation, we need to watch ourselves. We need to submit to God and then resist the devil, resist that temptation, and that temptation will flee. There are many of us who decide maybe not to be unfaithful to our spouse physically with someone else, but maybe we are tempted with other things, other lustful things, looking at women in inappropriate ways. Pornography is a big issue. We need to check ourselves how we're dealing with it. You have Carl Lentz, he's mega church pastors. He had so many followers on social media, so many people followed him, and he fell. For you guys, if you have certain platforms, you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself, guarding yourself, providing safe boundaries, and honoring your spouse, and protecting the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. So I just wanted to encourage you with that. Marriage is important. When we step out of our marriage, we are dishonoring the Lord. We're also dishonoring our spouse and our family. But the command for us not to commit adultery is for us to have lasting joy with our spouse, because marriage is supposed to resemble the covenant between God and his people, the covenant between Christ and his church. And when we experience that covenant and we remain faithful in that covenant, we experience joy. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you next time.